All right, UPSC enthusiasts, ready for a topic that's basically guaranteed to be on your exams.
Oh yeah, this one is a big word.
We are diving deep into landslides,
Landslides.
especially those in the Western Ghats.
Ah, yes, those majestic mountains.
They are a biodiversity hotspot, but
Oh,
they're also, unfortunately, prone to these natural disasters.
exactly. And, it's not just about understanding the science just for the sake of it.
Right.
It's about really equipping you to be able to analyze real-world scenarios.
Right.
Like those devastating landslides that hit Wayanad in July 2024.
Yeah, that was awful.
Those events are just a stark reminder of why this topic is so crucial for your UPSC preparation, especially for the mains exam.
Absolutely. And to help us unpack this complex issue, we have some fascinating research
Oh, very cool.
straight from the journal Nature Natural Hazards.
Okay.
And this study uses some pretty cool tech,
Oh, yeah.
runout modeling and RAMS simulations.
I know those terms might sound a little intimidating,
Yeah, a little bit.
but trust me, they're not as complicated as they seem.
Yeah, you're right.
So runout modeling basically maps out the path the landslide will take,
Okay.
kind of like predicting where a marble will roll if you set it loose on a tilted surface.
Oh, okay, I see.
And then RAM simulations take that a step further,
Okay.
creating this kind of virtual model of the landslide.
Uh-huh.
And it factors in things like the terrain, the debris type,
Oh, wow.
even the speed and the force of the flow.
So it's like a high-tech crystal ball for landslides.
That's a great way to put it.
And I'm guessing that this kind of information is super valuable for disaster management.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine knowing not only where a landslide will go,
Right.
but also how fast it will move, how much pressure it'll exert,
Yeah.
and where all that debris will end up.
Yeah.
It's like having a cheat sheet for disaster preparedness.
That makes total sense.
Right.
And this study actually revealed something pretty concerning.
It did.
Mm.
Well, one of the key findings was that a significant amount of debris accumulated at lower elevations.
That doesn't sound too good.
Right, and it might not seem like a big deal at first,
Yeah.
but it highlights a really crucial concept for UPSC aspirants,
Which is?
understanding the cascading effects of disasters.
You mean how one event can trigger a chain reaction?
Exactly. That debris buildup becomes a potential hazard for communities downstream.
Oh,
It's like a domino effect, and that's something you definitely want to be able to analyze in your mains exam.
For sure. And speaking of things that are crucial for the UPSC, this study really emphasized the importance of vulnerability mapping.
Vulnerability mapping.
Can you give our listeners a quick breakdown of what those are and why they're so important?
So think of vulnerability maps as specialized maps that show which areas are most susceptible to landslides.
Uh-huh.
They take into account everything from slope steepness and soil type to rainfall patterns.
So it's like a map that highlights the hotspots.
Yes, exactly. The areas where landslides are most likely to occur.
So for a UPSC aspirant, these maps are like gold ray.
Absolutely. They give you that kind of detailed, granular knowledge that can really impress examiners.
That's great. And speaking of understanding past events, this study highlighted a fascinating trend.
Okay.
It found that the 2024 debris flow followed a very similar path to previous landslides in Wayanad, including one in 1984 and another in 2019.
Oh, wow.
It's almost like history was repeating itself.
It really is, and that underscores a critical point for anyone studying for the UPSC.
What's that?
Understanding the history of disasters in a region is essential for effective preparedness and mitigation.
Makes sense.
It's not just about knowing what can happen, but where it's happened before and why.
Right. So if we know that a certain area has been hit before and we have these tools to predict where it might happen again,
Yeah.
it kind of begs the question, why aren't we doing more to prevent it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it leads us directly into another key takeaway from the study:
Okay.
the importance of early warning systems.
So we're talking about more than just knowing it could happen. It's about knowing when it's likely to happen.
Exactly. Early warning systems are all about using real-time data to anticipate when conditions are right for a landslide.
I see.
Think things like monitoring rainfall intensity and soil moisture levels.
Okay.
If those readings hit a certain threshold,
Yeah.
alarm bells start ringing.
So authorities can issue alerts, evacuate communities, and implement safety measures all before the landslide even hits.
Exactly. It's all about saving lives and minimizing damage.
Right.
And for you, the listener, understanding how these systems work is crucial for the UPSC.
Absolutely. Now, I know we've talked about landslides quite a bit, but can we just define what a landslide is?
Oh, of course. So, put simply, a landslide is the downward movement of rock, soil, or debris down a slope.
Okay.
It's like a giant, messy, and unfortunately sometimes very dangerous earth-moving process.
Right, and it's not just one big category.
No,
It's a whole spectrum.
yes, you've got slides, flows, spreads, topples, and falls.
Wow.
Each of these has its own distinct characteristics and mechanisms. So, for example, slides involve movement along a rupture surface,
Okay.
like a giant chunk of earth breaking loose and sliding downhill.
Okay.
While flows are more fluid with the material mixing with water and behaving almost like a river of mud.
Interesting. So it's not just one big category.
Right.
It's a whole spectrum of Earth movements,
Exactly.
each with its own triggers and consequences.
Exactly. And speaking of triggers, we've talked a lot about rainfall,
Uh-huh.
but other factors can cause these events too.
Right.
Earthquakes, for example, can destabilize slopes,
Oh, right.
particularly in areas with fragile geology.
Okay.
And then there are human activities,
Well, like what?
like deforestation and improper construction practices.
Yeah, those probably don't help.
No, they can significantly increase the risk.
Right, because removing trees takes away that natural support system that helps hold the soil in place. And if you're building on unstable slopes, well, that's just asking for trouble.
It really is.
So we've got a lot of ground to cover.
Yes, we do.
But let's focus on our region of interest, the Western Ghats.
Okay.
What makes this region particularly vulnerable compared to other landslide-prone areas like the Himalayas?
That's a great question. While both the Himalayas and the Western Ghats are susceptible to landslides, there are some key differences.
Okay, let's do a quick comparison for our UPSC listeners.
Okay.
Hit us with those key differences.
All right, so first consider the terrain.
Oh, okay, terrain.
The Himalayas are known for their steep, rugged slopes and high altitudes.
Yeah.
That makes them inherently unstable,
I see.
like a house of cards waiting to be toppled.
Okay, so already a recipe for potential landslides.
Right.
What about the Western Ghats?
Well, the slopes in the Western Ghats are generally less steep
Okay.
and more gradual,
Huh.
which does reduce the risk somewhat.
Okay,
However, the region is still prone to heavy rainfall during the monsoon season,
right.
which can saturate the soil and trigger those slides and flows we were talking about earlier.
So even though the terrain might be less dramatic, the intense rainfall can still be a major problem.
Yes, it can.
Are there other differences to consider?
Absolutely. Tectonic activity is another crucial factor.
Okay,
The Himalayas are situated in a highly active seismic zone,
right.
which means earthquakes are a frequent occurrence.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
And as we mentioned earlier, earthquakes can be a major trigger for landslides.
Yeah, especially in areas with already unstable slopes.
Exactly. So you've got the double whammy of steep slopes and frequent earthquakes,
Right.
making the Himalayas a real hotspot for landslides.
Wow, okay, so that's a big difference right there.
It is.
In contrast, the Western Ghats experience significantly less tectonic activity.
Much less.
While there have been some minor earthquakes, they're not a major trigger for landslides in the region.
That's right.
So less earthquake risk, but still facing those monsoon downpours.
Exactly.
What about the soil and rock composition in each region?
Oh, that definitely plays a role.
Okay, how so?
Well, the Himalayas are largely composed of unconsolidated debris like scree and moraine
Okay.
and fragile rock formations that are easily displaced.
Hmm.
This makes them more vulnerable to erosion and landslides.
It's like the ground itself is less stable, more prone to giving way.
Exactly.
How does that compare to the Western Ghats?
Well, the Western Ghats have a more stable soil and rock profile,
Okay,
which helps reduce the frequency and severity of landslides.
that's good.
However, it's important to remember that even relatively stable slopes can fail under the right conditions,
Yeah.
especially with prolonged heavy rainfall.
Right. So while the Western Ghats might have some geological advantages, they're not completely immune to these events.
Definitely not.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the causes of landslides,
Yes, we have.
but let's shift gears and focus on the impacts.
The impacts.
For our UPSC audience, it's crucial to understand the multifaceted consequences of these events.
You're absolutely right. The impacts of landslides can be devastating, affecting everything from human lives to infrastructure to the environment.
For sure.
This is something you'll need to be able to discuss comprehensively in your mains exam.
So let's break it down.
Okay.
First and foremost, the human cost.
Yes,
These events can be incredibly dangerous, right?
absolutely. Landslides can cause loss of life and injuries, sometimes on a large scale.
Oh, wow.
And it's not just the immediate impact.
Right.
The psychological trauma and the displacement of communities can have long-lasting effects.
Right. So it's not just about the physical damage. It's
No.
about the disruption to people's lives, their sense of security, their homes.
Exactly.
And on top of that, you've got the damage to infrastructure, which can be massive.
Exactly. Roads, bridges, buildings, communication lines.
Yeah.
Landslides can damage or destroy all of these,
Wow.
cutting off access to essential services and disrupting economic activity.
Right.
And in remote areas where access is already limited,
Yeah.
the impact can be even more severe.
Right, because it's not just about fixing the damage. It's about getting aid and resources to the affected areas.
Exactly.
Which becomes much harder when roads are blocked or bridges are washed out.
It does.
And then there are those cascading effects, right?
Yes.
You mentioned earlier that one landslide can trigger a chain reaction.
That's right. For example, a landslide can block a river or stream, creating a dam of debris. If that dam bursts, it can unleash a devastating flood downstream.
Oh, no.
Causing further destruction and loss of life.
So it's like a domino effect, one disaster leading to another.
Exactly.
And all of this has huge economic consequences as well.
Absolutely. The costs of repairing damaged infrastructure, providing relief to affected communities, and lost productivity can be enormous.
Yeah.
And for developing countries like India, where resources are already stretched, the economic burden of landslides can be particularly heavy.
Right, because it's not just about rebuilding what was lost. It's about the lost potential, the disrupted development, the setbacks to economic growth. And finally, we can't forget about the environmental impacts of landslides.
Very true. Landslides can lead to soil erosion, deforestation, and habitat loss, disrupting ecosystems and affecting biodiversity.
Oh, wow.
And in mountainous regions like the Himalayas, they can also contribute to the formation of glacial lakes, which pose a significant flood risk.
So it's a ripple effect that touches on so many different aspects of life and the environment.
It really is.
For UPSC aspirants, understanding these multifaceted impacts is crucial for formulating effective mitigation strategies and policies.
Couldn't agree more.
And speaking of mitigation, let's shift our focus to what the government is doing to address landslide risks in India.
Okay.
What are some of the key initiatives that UPSC aspirants should know about?
That's a great segue. India has taken several steps to mitigate landslide risks.
Okay.
These are definitely areas you'll want to be familiar with for the exam.
Now let's dive into those government initiatives.
Let's do it. So one key initiative is the National Landslide Risk Management Strategy, which was launched in 2019.
Okay, 2019.
This strategy takes a pretty comprehensive approach,
Okay.
covering everything from hazard mapping and monitoring to early warning systems and community awareness programs.
Wow, that's a lot.
It also emphasizes capacity building for disaster management agencies and developing effective policies for land use and construction in those landslide-prone areas.
This is like a multi-pronged attack on landslides.
Yeah, tackling the problem from all angles.
I like it. Are there other initiatives out there that our listeners should be aware of?
Absolutely. Another crucial one is the Landslide Risk Mitigation Scheme, or LRMS for short.
LRMS, okay.
This scheme provides financial assistance to states and union territories for implementing landslide mitigation projects.
So it's about providing the resources and funding
Yes.
to translate those national strategies into on-the-ground action.
Precisely. And there are a few other programs worth noting for the UPSC exam.
Oh, like what?
The Flood Risk Mitigation Scheme, or FRMS. While primarily focused on flood management,
Okay.
it also includes components related to landslide risk mitigation,
Interesting.
particularly in terms of early warning systems and evacuation planning.
Interesting. It makes sense that there'd be some overlap considering these disasters often occur together.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, are there any national level standards or guidelines
Oh, yeah.
that states and local authorities are expected to follow?
Absolutely. The National Disaster Management Authority, or NDMA,
Maybe America.
has issued very comprehensive guidelines on landslides and snow avalanches.
Okay.
These guidelines cover everything.
Wow.
From hazard assessment and risk management to structural and non-structural mitigation measures,
Okay.
institutional mechanisms, financial arrangements, and community involvement.
So it's like a blueprint for action,
Yes,
providing detailed guidance on how to address landslide risks from multiple angles.
precisely.
That's really helpful to know, especially for those tricky mains questions.
Yeah.
Where they ask you to analyze government policies and initiatives. And speaking of valuable resources, there's also the Landslide Atlas of India, right?
Yes, the Landslide Atlas, created by the National Remote Sensing Center under ISRO, provides a very comprehensive inventory of landslide events across India.
Oh.
It includes detailed information on the location type and severity of landslides, as well as damage assessments.
That's great.
It's a fantastic tool for understanding the historical patterns of landslides in India.
It sounds like a treasure trove of information for anyone studying this topic.
It really is.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of landslides, the impacts, and some key government initiatives.
Right.
But I want to zoom in on a specific challenge for UPSC aspirants.
Okay.
And that's navigating the political and policy debates surrounding these issues.
Yeah, those can be tricky.
And nowhere is that more evident than in the Western Ghats.
Very true. The Western Ghats, as we've discussed, are a biodiversity hotspot, but they're also home to millions of people.
Right.
And face significant development pressures.
Yeah, for sure.
Balancing conservation with the needs of local communities is a complex challenge.
It really is.
And it's a theme that pops up frequently in the UPSC syllabus.
So it's about navigating that classic dilemma of protecting the environment versus promoting economic growth.
Exactly.
Can you tell us about the controversies surrounding the committees formed to conserve this region?
Sure. There are two main committees that sparked significant debate.
Okay.
The Madhav-Gadgil-led Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel, which submitted its report in 2011.
Okay, the Gadgil panel.
And the Kastarangan Committee, which was set up in response to the Gadgil report and released its recommendations in 2013.
Okay, two different committees, presumably with two different approaches.
Right.
What were the key differences?
Well, the Gadgil panel took a more stringent approach.
Okay.
They recommended that the entire Western Ghats be declared an ecologically sensitive area, or ESA, with strict regulations on development activity.
Okay, so essentially they were advocating for maximum protection of the entire region.
Yes.
Prioritizing environmental conservation above all else.
That's right.
That's a pretty bold stance. I'm guessing that didn't go over well with everyone.
You're right. The Gadgil report faced significant pushback.
Yeah.
Particularly from state governments and local communities.
I see.
Who argued that it was too restrictive.
Okay.
And would hinder economic development.
Right.
They felt it didn't adequately consider the needs of the people living in the region.
So a classic clash between environmental concerns and development aspirations.
Exactly.
Enter the Kastarangan Committee, right?
Yes.
What was their take on the issue?
Well, the Kastarangan Committee, recognizing the need for a more balanced approach, recommended that only 37% of the Western Ghats be designated as ESA.
Okay, much less than the Gadgil panel's proposal.
Significantly less.
So a more moderate approach trying to find that middle ground.
Yes, they aim to strike a balance between conservation and development.
Okay.
They proposed a complete ban on mining, quarrying, and sand mining in the designated ESA areas. They also recommended no new thermal power projects be allowed, and that hydropower projects be permitted only after a detailed environmental impact assessment.
So still some pretty significant restrictions.
Yes.
Particularly on industries known for their environmental impact.
That's right.
I imagine even this more moderate approach faced some opposition.
It did, while it was seen as more pragmatic than the Gadgil report.
Yeah.
Some environmental groups argued that it didn't go far enough to protect the fragile ecosystem of the Western Ghats.
Right.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
It seems like finding that perfect balance is an ongoing challenge.
It really is.
And for you, the listener, understanding these different perspectives and the nuances of these debates is essential for crafting well-rounded answers in your UPSC mains exam.
Absolutely.
Now let's get to the practical stuff.
Yeah, practical stuff.
What can be done to prevent these hazards from happening in the first place?
That's the question everyone wants answered.
Yeah.
And thankfully, there are a number of measures that can be taken, often in combination for the best results.
All right, let's break it down into categories.
Okay.
What are some of the key engineering solutions that can be used to stabilize slopes and prevent those landslides from happening?
Well, engineering solutions often involve physically altering the landscape to make it more stable. One common technique is slope stabilization.
Slope stabilization.
This might involve building retaining walls, installing rock bolts or soil nails.
Okay.
Or using ground anchors to reinforce the soil.
So it's like giving the slope some extra support.
Yes.
Making it less likely to give way.
Exactly.
And I've heard of terracing being used as well.
Yeah.
Can you explain how that works?
So terracing is another effective method, particularly on steeper slopes.
Okay.
It involves creating a series of flat platforms or steps,
okay,
which helps to reduce the angle of the slope. and slow down water runoff.
Interesting.
It's like breaking up the slope into smaller, more manageable sections.
I see.
Making it less susceptible to those large-scale slides.
That makes sense. What about drainage systems?
Drainage is essential for preventing water from building up in the soil and weakening the slope.
Right.
This might involve installing drainage channels, pipes, or culverts to redirect water away from vulnerable areas.
So it's like giving the water an escape route.
Yes.
So it doesn't hang around and cause trouble.
Exactly.
So it's all about being proactive.
Uh-huh.
Managing those potential triggers before they have a chance to cause a disaster.
Exactly.
What other engineering techniques are commonly used?
Well, soil reinforcement is another approach.
Soil reinforcement.
This involves using geotechnical materials like geotextiles and geogrids to strengthen the soil and improve its stability.
So it's like adding a layer of extra strength.
Yes.
Making the soil more resistant to movement.
Exactly.
Okay, so those are some of the key engineering solutions.
Right.
But what about natural solutions?
Natural solution.
Are there ways to work with nature to prevent landslides?
There are, and often these natural solutions can be more effective and sustainable than relying solely on engineering approaches.
That makes sense.
One of the most important is vegetation control.
Okay, so we're talking about trees, shrubs, grasses, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Planting vegetation on slopes helps to bind the soil together with its roots.
Yeah.
Absorb excess water and reduce erosion.
Right, so it's like creating a natural network of support.
Yes.
Holding the soil in place and preventing it from giving way.
Exactly.
And it's not just about planting new vegetation.
Right. No, it's not.
It's also about protecting existing forests and woodlands.
Absolutely. Deforestation is a major contributor to landslide risk.
Right.
So preserving those natural buffers is crucial.
So vegetation is key, but what other natural solutions are there?
Another important one is water management.
Water management, okay.
This might involve techniques like contouring, which involves plowing and planting along the contours of a slope to slow down water runoff. You're essentially working with the natural shape of the land to guide the water, preventing it from rushing downhill and eroding the soil.
Clever. Are there other water management techniques commonly used?
Yes. Creating rain gardens is another popular technique.
Rain gardens.
These are depressions in the landscape designed to collect and absorb rainwater.
Okay.
Instead of letting that water run off and potentially trigger a landslide, you're capturing it and allowing it to soak into the ground, replenishing the water table.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's a win-win for both the environment and the community.
All right. Earlier we talked about early warning systems.
Yes.
But what other technologies are being used to monitor and predict landslides?
Technology is playing an increasingly important role in landslide risk management.
It really is.
One example is LiDAR.
LiDAR.
Which stands for light detection and ranging.
Okay.
It's a remote sensing technology that uses laser pulses to create highly detailed 3D maps of the terrain.
So it's like giving scientists X-ray vision of the landscape.
Yeah, a great way to put it.
Allowing them to see those subtle changes that might indicate a potential landslide.
Exactly. LiDAR can detect things like ground movements, changes in slope angles, and even the growth of cracks, all of which can be early warning signs of a landslide.
That's amazing. And I imagine satellite imagery is also being used for this, right?
Absolutely. Satellites equipped with high-resolution cameras can monitor vast areas of land.
Right.
Looking for signs of deforestation, erosion, and other changes that might increase landslide risk.
It's like having eyes in the sky constantly watching for those potential hazards.
That's right. And with all this data being collected, scientists can start to build predictive models to anticipate where and when landslides are most likely to occur.
That's really cool. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground on landslide prevention.
We have.
But there's one more piece I want to touch on.
Okay.
Best practices for land use and development.
Very important.
Clearly, where and how we build things can have a huge impact on landslide risk.
Absolutely. Land use planning and development play a critical role in reducing landslide hazards.
For sure.
It's all about making smart choices about where we build, how we build, and how we manage the land.
Okay, let's get specific.
Yeah.
What are some key best practices that our UPSC listeners should be aware of?
One of the most fundamental principles is avoiding development on steep slopes or in areas with known landslide hazards.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's about recognizing that some areas are simply too risky to build on.
Yeah, and if development does occur in these areas, what are some things that can be done to mitigate those risks?
One important consideration is limiting impervious surfaces like concrete and asphalt.
Okay.
These surfaces prevent water from soaking into the ground and increase runoff, which can erode the soil and contribute to landslides.
So more green spaces, more permeable surfaces that allow the water to infiltrate.
Exactly. Designing proper drainage systems is also crucial.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier.
As we discussed, managing water is key to preventing landslides. So incorporating features like swales, retention ponds, and vegetated drainage channels can help to control runoff and protect slopes.
So it's about thinking holistically.
Yes.
Integrating those water management principles into the design from the very beginning.
Exactly.
What about construction practices?
Construction practices.
Are there certain methods that are more landslide resistant?
Absolutely. Building codes and regulations should incorporate landslide-resistant construction techniques. This might involve using reinforced foundations, anchoring structures to bedrock, and designing buildings to withstand the forces of a potential landslide.
So it's about building stronger, more resilient structures that can better withstand those extreme events.
Exactly.
And of course, responsible land management plays a role too.
Exactly. Implementing erosion control measures, promoting reforestation, and avoiding practices that disturb the soil can all help to reduce landslide risk.
So the multifaceted approach involving smart planning, responsible development, and sustainable land management practices.
You got it.
This is all incredibly useful information for anyone tackling the UPSC exam.
It is.
Especially the mains papers, where you'll need to demonstrate a thorough understanding of these issues.
Absolutely.
Now, I know we've thrown a lot of information at our listeners.
We have.
Can we recap some of the key takeaways they should remember for their UPSC preparation?
Of course, landslides are a complex issue with far-reaching consequences.
Yeah, they are.
It's crucial for the exam to understand the science behind these events, the factors that trigger them, and the impacts they have. You'll want to be able to discuss the geological aspects, the environmental impact, the socioeconomic consequences, and the policy responses in detail.
For sure. And don't forget about the role of technology and innovation.
Yes.
In monitoring, predicting, and preventing landslides.
Very important.
Those tools are constantly evolving, and staying up to date on the latest advancements is essential for crafting informed solutions.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
We have.
But I want to leave them with a final thought-provoking question to ponder. As they continue their UPSC journey. Something that really gets to the heart of the ethical considerations we've been discussing.
I like it. How about this? We've talked about the need to balance development with environmental protection, particularly in landslide-prone areas. But where do we draw the line?
Ooh, that's a good one.
What are the ethical and practical considerations involved in making those tough decisions? How do we weigh the economic needs of communities against the long-term sustainability of the environment? And who ultimately gets to make those calls?
Those are some heavy questions.
They are.
And it's exactly the kind of critical thinking the UPSC exam demands.
It is.
So to all our aspiring IAS officers out there, we encourage you to grapple with these questions. Explore different perspectives, and come up with your own well-informed answers.
Good advice.
Remember, this is about more than just acing an exam. It's about understanding the challenges we face as a society. And using your knowledge to make a positive impact on the world. And it's not just about waiting until you've cleared the UPSC exam to make a difference. There are so many ways you can get involved right now, even while you're studying for the exam.
Tell me more.
Well, one way is to support organizations that are working on the ground in landslide-prone areas.
Oh, yeah. That's a great idea.
There are so many NGOs and community groups doing incredible work.
I bet.
On disaster preparedness, environmental conservation, and sustainable development.
That's fantastic.
And a lot of these organizations rely on volunteers, donations, and advocacy to make a difference. Even small contributions can have a big impact.
I agree.
Another way to get involved is to raise awareness in your own communities.
That's a good idea.
You can talk to your friends and family about landslide risks. Share information on social media. Advocate for policies that promote sustainable land use and disaster preparedness.
Be an informed citizen, spread the word. Hold our leaders accountable for making responsible decisions.
Absolutely. And for those of you with a passion for research or technology, you can contribute there as well. Universities, research institutions, and government agencies are always looking for talented individuals.
They are.
To contribute to landslide studies. develop new technologies, and improve our understanding of these events.
That's right.
So whether you're interested in fieldwork data analysis or policy advocacy, there's a place for you in the fight against landslides.
I agree. Now, for those just starting to explore this topic, what resources can they turn to for more information?
Well, the Geological Survey of India, or GSI, has a website packed with information on landslides.
That's great.
You can find maps, reports, and even educational materials.
Wow.
It's a great starting point for understanding the geological aspects.
Okay, that's for the geological side of things. What about resources